It's already been said that I have been active in Trotskyist politics for more than a half century. And so in the course of that half century, I have gained not a small amount of familiarity with the Palestinian movement and the struggle of the Palestinian people against Zionism and imperialism, and have witnessed many of the different conflicts through which they have passed. The fact is that the tragedy of that struggle is exemplified in the fact that the solution to national oppression and all forms of oppression is bound up with the struggle of the working class. There is no exclusively national solution, and accounts cannot be settled with imperialism except through the mobilization on a world scale of that force which has a power to put an end to the capitalist system. That is to say that the most basic lesson of Trotskyism, which is rooted in the theory of permanent revolution, is that the national struggle can only be resolved through the social struggle. That is only through the conquest of power, the overthrow of the capitalist system, can the atrocities of imperialist barbarism be answered. Now, in that sense, I'd like to make the point that during the past year, since October 7th, 2023, there have been no shortage of demonstrations, of protests against the war being waged by Israel against the Palestinians in Gaza. The problem has not been an absence of moral outrage. But yet, after a year of protests, what do we witness? Have those protests brought an end to the Israeli genocide? Has it brought about a change in policy? What has it achieved? The war's not ending, it's expanding. The atrocities are expanding throughout the West Bank. It is expanding into Lebanon, and we are on the verge of a war, if the Israelis have their way, with Iran, supported by the United States. So what lessons does one draw from this? The problem has not been moral outrage. The problem has not been protest. The problem has been the lack of a historical and political perspective. And if I can speak bluntly to you, if you want to fight imperialism, then you have to be able to base that struggle on a correct and scientific perspective. You have to be able to draw on the basis of that historical experience the appropriate political strategy. Now, during the past year in the United States, we've had many discussions with young people who are active in various Palestinian national movements. And I've always noticed that there's a vast chasm between the level of their personal anger and the extreme limitations of their political understanding. For all the protests, for all the anger, at the end of the day, the perspective seems to be, let us appeal to the capitalist politicians, let us put pressure on them, and they'll change their policy. And if Kamala Harris won't change her policy, we'll find somebody else who will. That perspective is politically bankrupt, and it is duplicated throughout the world. In Britain, the demonstrations take place under the aegis of the reformist pseudo-left elements of the Labour Party. None of this accomplishes anything. Now, the title of this discussion is Back to the Future: Genocide, War, and Fascism. Now, the meaning of the title is the following. All the horrors that we are observing today, the horrors of genocide, the resurgence of fascism, the danger of war, these were the realities of the 20th century, particularly the first half of the 20th century, and most specifically for the 31 years between 1914 and 1945. The numbers of victims in the two wars of the last century, of the genocides that took place, and the genocide in Germany under the Nazis was not the only one, cost the lives of somewhere between 70 and 100 million people. If you read about World War I, you will come across the observation in many of these histories that the war took many by surprise. The summer of 1914 was a very lovely summer. Beautiful weather. Many young people went on their vacations when school closed down for the summer. The war broke out in late July, early August, and many of those youth who enjoyed a lovely summer vacation and were looking forward to the new school year were dead by Christmas. Now, even as we meet today, we face a situation where it is entirely possible that there will be a major war, particularly if Israel carries out, with American support, its attack on Iran. The situation is extremely dangerous. We know that during the past 24 hours or 48 hours, President Biden flew over to Germany. And he was joined by not only by Macron, but by Starmer from Britain, Macron from France. Biden was here for less than 24 hours. Now, the movement of a president from one country to another is not a small matter. When the president flies from one country to another, it involves a massive logistical effort simply to provide him with the security that the United States demands. So I assume that Biden did not come over to Germany just to receive an award from Chancellor Scholz. Something of sufficient significance was involved that required Biden's personal presence. What could they have been discussing? Well, again, let us place the events in Gaza and throughout the region in its appropriate context. The war in Gaza is not the only war that is being waged at the present time. There's a war in Ukraine that has already cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The scale of death within Ukraine is staggering. We have a comrade who has opposed the war, Comrade Bogdan Seratyuk, who's in prison for opposing that war and for fighting for the policies of the International Committee. Now, that war has gone badly for the United States and its Ukrainian clients and for its German sponsors. But that war is part of an escalating global conflict, and one can be fairly certain that the increasing aggressive policies being pursued by the United States and Germany, NATO allies, in relationship to Iran is bound up with the war in Ukraine itself, an attempt to open up another front to place maximum pressure on the Russians even as the operation within Ukraine is failing. Now, as I said, when we say back to the future, the phenomena of war, the phenomena of genocide, the phenomena of fascism are reemerging. All of these words, all of these conditions would have been familiar to advanced workers and youth 100 years ago or 80 years ago. But there is another element of this term which I wish to emphasize when we use back to the future. The fact of the matter is that the conditions which we confront today, and it goes to the problem of the difference between moral outrage and political perspective, what is absent today and what must be overcome is the necessary political understanding of the forces of an objective character that are driving these atrocities. We look into the past, not because we're simply interested in history as an abstract question, but we look into the past in order to acquire from the past the necessary lessons to understand the present. And so when we say back to the future, if there is a future, there must be a reconquest within the working class and the advanced sections of youth, an understanding of the Marxist analysis of the laws of capitalism. And let me just make a few points about this. Now, the basic Marxist analysis of the catastrophes of the 20th century was that underlying this were not simply evil intentions, but objective contradictions rooted in the social and economic structure of capitalism. What are those contradictions? The two most fundamental are the conflict between the social production that dominates economic life and private property. That is, the massive forces of production as they developed in the late 19th and early 20th century remained under the control of private property. Social production, that is, production involving the labor of millions of people. But the production of commodities is determined by the interests of the capitalist class. The second great contradiction was the contradiction between the increasingly international character of the productive process and the existing nation-state system. Therein lay all the geopolitical conflicts that gave rise to war. The conflict, for example, in 1914 between Germany and France, Germany and Britain, what they called inter-imperialist antagonisms. The struggle among these major imperialist powers for dominance in the world economy. The same contradictions were present in 1939, 1945, which more and more emerged as a fundamental conflict between German imperialism, British imperialism, and the new and emerging and most powerful of all the imperialist powers, the United States. Of course, the United States presented its intervention in the conflict as a struggle for democracy. America's always fighting for democracy. But in essence, the real cause was that the United States was not prepared to accept the hegemony of German imperialism, or for that matter, British imperialism in Europe and in the Atlantic, and it was not going to accept the dominance of Japanese imperialism in the Pacific. It was a war for the reorganization of capitalism. That was its essential character. Those were the conflicts which led to the outbreak of these massive conflicts. Now, history doesn't just repeat itself. You might compare history to a spiral. by which we mean the following: the same contradictions that existed and which drove war 1914, 1939, have reemerged, but on a much higher, more complex, and I must say, explosive level. When we think of the world economy of today, or of global production today, and compare it to what existed in 1914 or 1939, there is, of course, a vast difference. The predominance and dominance of global production, of global production networks, is on a scale several orders of magnitude beyond what could have existed not just 80 years ago, but even 50 years ago or 30 years ago. There is, of course, a profound relationship between technology and economy. The extraordinary changes in communications technology, information technology, the enormous advances made in computer programming, artificial intelligence, transportation systems, have vastly and profoundly changed the whole production process of the world. The old multinational corporation has been superseded by the transnational corporation, transnational production. Economic, technological realities, which have therefore, and herein lies, I might say, the good news, has profoundly changed the relationship between masses of people. Every one of us lives in a world which places our daily existence, our daily practice in direct interaction with millions of people. How many of you have a Apple phone in this audience? Just raise your hand if you have an Apple phone. Or for that matter, any major cell phone device, even our friends who might be using them not too frequently. The fact of the matter, each time you hold a cell phone in your hand, and if it's an Apple phone in your hand, you're holding a commodity which is the product not of national labor. It's not a nationally produced commodities. Commodities no longer have a national identity. When the fascist Trump declares he will make America great again, he will restore production, everything will be made in America. What nonsense. Nothing's made in America. Nothing's made anywhere. Everything virtually today is a global product because all the components have different national origins. Where they're assembled is only one moment in a much more complex process. So in that sense, as an objective fact, the working class has been internationalized. That's the world in which we live. So when we're asked or told that our program is unrealistic, when we speak of the international unity of the working class, that's a utopia. You can't achieve that. Well, the fact of the matter is, the international coordination of labor is the basis of the modern world economy. We live in that every day. So the issue is, for those of you who want to put an end to what now exists, how are we to translate this fundamental economic reality, social reality, into a political program? If the capitalists can organize production on a world scale in order to make profit, why should it be impossible to organize the working class on a global scale to make world revolution? Each of these two processes are connected. And that's why, when we look at the present world situation, to sum up, how will this disastrous situation be resolved? On the eve of World War II, just 1 year before his death, Trotsky was interviewed, and I refer to this in this book. Trotsky was interviewed by a number of American journalists who wanted to know what his views were on the future of the world. What did he think would happen? And he said, and this was 2 months before the outbreak of World War II, he said, "I see no peaceful solution to the present crisis. The problems of the present will be solved only in one of two ways, and probably both. There will be wars and there will be revolutions. These are the ways great historical problems are dealt with." He was right. There was certainly war, and there were revolutions, or at least attempts at revolutions. These revolutions were betrayed by Stalinism, betrayed by social democracy. Capitalism was given a new lease on life. And even in countries where the Stalinists held power, as we saw between 1989 and 1991, they, as the Trotskyist movement predicted, liquidated it all, with catastrophic consequences. So now, here we are, in the 21st century, compelled to solve the problems which were not solved in the last century. There are great dangers, but we also know scientifically that objective conditions exist for the overcoming of these problems. But that requires, finally, that we solve the one great problem that was not solved in the last century. That's the problem of revolutionary leadership. And the question that presents itself to us, as it presented itself to our grandparents or great-grandparents in the last century, the problem of the construction of revolutionary leadership, the problem of winning the working class to this perspective. Now, is that possible? We know from history that it can be done. It was done once. It was done in Russia in 1917. The most advanced political party that ever existed won the leadership of the working class and set into motion the greatest revolutionary transformation the world had ever seen. A party which had been very small when the war began, but was transformed by the interaction of a colossal global crisis and an advanced political leadership. Can that happen again? Well, if it happened once, why can't it happen again? The fact is, however, we don't pose that question as spectators, saying, well, let's see, hope so. No, we intervene. What can and cannot be or cannot be accomplished will be decided in struggle, in the decisions, particularly which the youth make about the future you want to have. That's the decisive question. Now, finally, I just wanted to call your attention to the fact that there has been in the recent period substantial attacks on our movement. There's a book, for example, called The Twilight of World Trotskyism. And the argument made by this writer is that the Trotskyists have an all or nothing approach. They eliminate the possibility of reform, and they don't win votes. Well, if there's any argument against reform, against the perspective of reformism, it's the state of world politics. In what country do we see magnificent achievements by the reformists, by the opponents of Marxism? What predominates today in capitalist politics is reaction in its most brutal form. What we're putting forward, as I've said, is a revolutionary perspective. Objective conditions are leading to an explosion of class struggle throughout the world. However terrible the experience of the past year, I am convinced that it has caused immense disquiet and anger. And it is compelling workers and young people, thoughtful students, to think seriously about the future. Such crimes always have an impact. A recognition that new and more powerful and effective answers must be found. But those answers will only be found on the basis of Marxism, on the basis of a socialist perspective. And therefore, I'd like to, in concluding my remarks before taking questions and discussion, urge you to draw the most important conclusion. If you want to fight, study, read, understand the laws of development, turn to the revolutionary force that exists within society, the working class, build a revolutionary party. That's the main slogan of our time. Thank you very much, comments.